The night of September 13, 1971, was still over the seaside resort of Beidaihe, a retreat for China's elite. Shortly after midnight, that silence was shattered. The urgent roar of jet engines tore through the darkness. A Hawker Siddeley Trident jet, property of the Chinese Air Force, was taking off from a military runway. It climbed steeply, without lights, without a flight plan, and without communication. Its trajectory was a stark betrayal. It was heading north, towards the vast, hostile territory of the Soviet Union. It never reached its destination. To understand the significance of that doomed flight, we must understand the world from which it fled. China in 1971 was a nation convulsed by the Cultural Revolution, a political firestorm ignited by one man, Mao Zedong. For years the country was plunged into a state of near civil war, where revolutionary fervor became a weapon. Millions were persecuted, ancient traditions destroyed, and the social fabric was ripped apart in the name of ideological purity. At the center of this storm sat Chairman Mao, the great helmsman, a figure elevated to the status of a living god. His word was absolute law, his image ubiquitous. Loyalty to Mao was not a political stance, it was a sacred duty, and the slightest hint of dissent was a death sentence. In this high-stakes world of absolute power and paranoia, one man had navigated the treacherous currents better than anyone. His name was Lin Biao. On board that fleeing Trident jet was not some minor dissident but Mao's closest comrade in arms, the celebrated Marshal who led the Red Army to victory, and the man officially designated in the nation's constitution as Mao's successor. He was the architect of the very cult of personality that deified Mao. It was Lin who compiled the Little Red Book, transforming it into a sacred text for hundreds of millions. He crafted the image of the infallible leader, and in doing so, cemented his own position as the second most powerful man in China. He seemed untouchable. But in the shadowy halls of Zhongnanhai, the seat of Chinese power, alliances were fragile. By the early 1970s, Mao's legendary paranoia began to turn towards his own chosen heir. He saw Lin's influence within the military not as a strength, but as a potential threat. The master of the political purge began to suspect his own apprentice of plotting against him. The relationship between the two most powerful men in China curdled from camaraderie into a cold war of suspicion, which brings us back to the mystery of that night. How could the man who built the altar of Mao worship end up a fugitive? The official narrative from Beijing was swift and damning. Lin Biao, a secret traitor, orchestrated a failed coup and died while attempting to defect to the Soviet enemy. But for an event of such magnitude, the explanation felt too neat. The crash of Flight 256 was more than just the end of a traitor. It was a political earthquake that exposed the brutal, hidden realities of power within the world's most secretive regime. This is the story of what truly happened, a search for the truth behind the fall of Lin Biao. Lin Biao was a brilliant strategist, celebrated for victories during the Chinese Civil War. Mao once praised him as the glorious example of the People's Liberation Army. By the late 1960s, Lin Biao had reached the zenith of power in communist China. A brilliant military tactician from the Civil War, his loyalty to Mao Zedong appeared absolute. It was Lin who masterminded the Little Red Book, a collection of Mao's quotations that became the sacred text of the Cultural Revolution, deifying the chairman. This act of supreme devotion was rewarded. At the Ninth Party Congress in 1969, Lin's position was formalized in the party constitution itself. He was vice chairman, and officially Mao's chosen successor, the man destined to inherit control of the most populous nation on earth. But the very movement that had elevated Lin, the great proletarian cultural revolution, was a double-edged sword. It plunged the nation into a decade of violent purges, factional warfare, and profound social upheaval. Loyalty was a currency that could be devalued overnight. But within the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, mistrust grew, not like a weed but like a contagion, infecting every corner of the political establishment right up to the very top. No one, it seemed, was truly safe from the chairman's ever-watchful eye. And at the center of this web sat Mao Zedong, a ruler whose political survival had always depended on his ability to neutralize threats. Now, in his later years, this instinct curdled into a deep-seated paranoia. Mao saw conspiracies everywhere. He began to perceive Lin Biao's immense popularity within the military not as a strength for the regime, but as a potential threat to his own supreme authority. The turning point came at the 1970 Lushan Conference. A push by Lin's allies to reinstate the position of state chairman was interpreted by Mao as a direct challenge. Mao didn't confront Lin directly. Instead, he began a classic campaign of political attrition, criticizing Lin's key supporters and methodically dismantling his power base piece by agonizing piece. As Mao's political net tightened, Lin Biao retreated further into himself, and Lin, increasingly isolated, reclusive, and in poor health, became a ghost in the halls of power. Plagued by a litany of real and imagined ailments, including a debilitating fear of light and water, he rarely appeared in public, a virtual prisoner in his own villa. In this vacuum, he relied on his family. His wife, Ye Kun, was ambitious and politically astute, acting as his gatekeeper and political proxy. She understood the shifting winds in Beijing far better than her sequestered husband, and she saw the danger approaching with terrifying clarity. It was Ye Kun, along with their son, the zealous Air Force officer Lin Biao, who saw the writing on the wall. They watched as Mao systematically stripped away their family's power, knowing it was only a matter of time before the chairman came for them directly. They pressed the ailing Lin Biao, convincing him that inaction meant certain death. In this desperate atmosphere, a whispered warning became a call to action.
The chairman does not trust us, we must prepare.
This preparation took the form of a shocking plan, allegedly codenamed Project 571. The numbers in Mandarin are a homophone for armed uprising. Spearheaded by the young radical Lin Biao and his cabal of loyal officers, the plot was nothing less than a coup d'état. Their plan: assassinate Mao during an inspection tour of southern China, then use the military forces loyal to Lin Biao to seize control of the country. It was a desperate all-or-nothing gamble, born from the crucible of power and paranoia that defined Mao's China. According to later accounts, Lin's son, Lin Biao, drafted a plan codenamed Project 571, a supposed coup to assassinate Mao and seize power. Whether Lin himself approved remains one of China's enduring mysteries.
If we wait, Mao will destroy us first.
The meticulously crafted coup, codenamed Project 571, had unraveled with breathtaking speed. A tip-off, allegedly from Lin Biao's own daughter Lin Dudu, had reached Zhou Enlai, and the net was closing in. Panic erupted within the walls of Lin's seaside villa at Beidaihe. The plot to assassinate Mao Zedong was not just a failure, it was a death sentence for everyone involved. There was only one desperate option left: escape. When their plan collapsed, Lin and his family attempted to flee, transforming from the nation's second-in-command to its most wanted fugitives in a matter of hours. In a mad dash to Shanhaiguan Airport, they bypassed frantic calls from Beijing ordering them to stand down. On the tarmac, chaos reigned. The designated aircraft, a Hawker Siddeley Trident jet, was not ready. It was only partially fueled, and key members of the flight crew, including the navigator and radio operator, were missing. When a guard detail attempted to halt the unauthorized departure, a shot rang out in the darkness. Lin's son, Lin Biao, had wounded the unit's commander. They scrambled aboard the plane, a small group of 9, including Lin Biao, his wife Ye Kun, and their son, leaving behind a scene of confusion and violence. At approximately 12:32 a.m. on September 13, 1971, Trident 256 lifted into the darkness. It did so without clearance from air traffic control, without its navigation lights on, and critically, without a full tank of fuel. The takeoff was clumsy and dangerous. The plane careened down the runway and barely cleared the perimeter, a wounded bird taking flight into an unforgiving night. On the ground, stunned airport staff could only watch as the personal jet of China's Minister of Defense vanished, a rogue blip on a radar screen heading north. Inside the unpressurized cabin, another desperate debate was unfolding. The pilot, Pan Jingyin, was a veteran of the People's Liberation Army Air Force, but he was flying blind, without a navigator or co-pilot he could trust. The initial plan was likely to fly to the Soviet Union and seek asylum. But the fuel situation was dire. The partial refueling on the ground meant they could never reach a major Soviet city like Irkutsk or Chita. Did they have a secondary destination? Was there a backup plan, or were they simply flying on blind hope? The instruments told a grim story. With every passing minute, their options and their fuel were dwindling. As the aircraft crossed into Mongolian airspace, the engines began to sputter. The fuel was gone. Pan Jingyin was now forced to attempt an emergency landing at night in the middle of the vast, featureless Mongolian steppe. With no power and no lights on the ground to guide him, the landing was a near impossible gamble. At around 2:30 a.m., just under 2 hours after its frantic departure, the gamble failed. The plane came down hard near Ondorkhan, Mongolia. The impact and subsequent fire obliterated the aircraft. Hours later, Mongolian herdsmen would discover the smoldering wreckage. There were no survivors. The man who was once Mao's closest comrade in arms, his constitutionally designated successor, now lay dead in a foreign field. His body burned almost beyond recognition. All 9 people aboard were killed. But back in China, there was only silence. The news was a state secret of the highest order, known only to Mao and a handful of top leaders. For the Chinese people and for the rest of the world, Lin Biao was still the revered vice chairman. The official story would take weeks to formulate and months to disseminate, a carefully constructed narrative of betrayal and treason. When the news finally broke, it wouldn't just be shock, it would be a profound crisis of faith, shattering the carefully crafted image of unity at the top of the Communist Party, and leaving a political vacuum that would define the final chaotic years of the Cultural Revolution. For weeks, an official wall of silence surrounded the incident. When the news finally broke, Lin Biao was denounced as a traitor. But crucial details were vague, and contradictions only fueled rampant speculation. The Lin Biao incident remains one of the most mysterious episodes of Mao's China. Was it a coup, a desperate escape, or a staged betrayal? 50 years later, the truth is still locked behind the walls of secrecy.